Hi, I'm Aveline and I wish I could tell you my family treated me with love that day. But at my own son's wedding, my sister-in-law looked me straight in the eye, called me a fat pig, and tore my handbag from my shoulder while everyone laughed. I stood there, frozen, humiliated, until a stranger stepped forward and said something that changed everything. You wouldn't believe what happened next. The moment I stepped out of the car, I knew I didn't belong. It was my brother's wedding, lavish, glittering, set at one of those country clubs where the valet looks you up and down before taking your keys. I wore a navy blue dress I'd owned for years, simple, with a neckline I adjusted twice before even walking through the door. The women around me were wrapped in designer gowns that shimmered under the chandeliers. My heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that screamed, outsider. I didn't have a +1. No child tugging my sleeve. No mother fussing with my hair. Just me, and a tight knot sitting behind my ribcage. Then I saw her, Frances. My sister-in-law stood near the bar, drink in hand, laughing with a cluster of women in rose gold. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her eyes flicked over me like I was background noise. That familiar weight settled on my chest. Frances had always been cold, like a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. She had this way of making you feel like a charity case, even when you were the one who brought the casserole. At Thanksgiving, she'd once asked if I was finally on a diet or just fasting for attention. Last Christmas, she'd joked that my thrift store coat was vintage homeless. But tonight was my brother's big day. I promised myself I'd stay calm. Just make it through the night, smile politely, and drive home. I moved toward the hors d'oeuvres table. A waiter passed with flutes of champagne. I took one and sipped, trying not to fidget. Is that what you're wearing? Frances' voice cut through the music. She was behind me now, her words wrapped in silk and venom. I turned. Yes, I thought it would be appropriate. She scanned me head to toe. For what? A PTA meeting? A few nearby guests chuckled. I tried to steady my hands. It's my brother's wedding. I came to support him. Brave of you, she said, loud enough to wear horizontal stripes when you're carrying that much confidence. My stomach dropped. Laughter. Quiet, awkward. Eyes turned away. Nobody stopped her. Not even my brother, who stood talking to someone just a few feet away. He didn't hear, or pretended not to. I felt the room tilt. The walls stretched. My skin burned. I stared at the chandelier, trying to anchor myself to something. I'm just joking, she added, smirking, lighten up. She turned back to her group like she'd just dropped the mic. I walked away, toward the drinks table, past whispers, avoiding faces. My hands trembled as I reached for another glass. But she followed. I felt her presence before she said anything. Then came the tug. My bag, snatched clean off my shoulder. Let me guess, Frances said, holding it up, Chinatown special? I froze. The room hushed. A few guests paused their conversations. Phones lifted, some to snap pictures, others just caught in the moment. I took a breath. That's mine. Relax, she grinned, I just wanted to see if it had real leather or old couch vibes. I stepped closer, eyes on hers. Frances, give it back. Her nails tapped against the clasp like she was checking for a secret compartment. Then, from the right, a voice, cool and crisp. That bag's a limited edition Hermes Kelly. 2004 collection. It's worth over $20,000. Silence. All heads turned. A man I didn't recognize stood beside me, tailored suit, calm demeanor. He didn't look at Frances. He looked at the bag. Then at me. Frances blinked. Oh, I was just teasing. Didn't mean anything by it. He raised an eyebrow. Well, I'd suggest teasing with your own property next time. She placed the bag down like it burned her hands. I picked it up slowly. Nodded at him. Said nothing. The whispers changed direction. From mocking to murmuring. Eyes that once laughed now shifted with curiosity. Maybe guilt. Frances turned away, her smile tight and cracking. I stood still, breathing shallow. My grip on the bag tightened, not because I was afraid it would be taken again, but because it was the only thing in the room that I could control. What they didn't know was that the bag wasn't the most expensive thing Frances tried to take from me that day. I stood in front of the mirror, gripping the edge of the marble sink like it might hold me together. The lighting in the restroom was too bright, too honest. My reflection didn't lie, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy, lips pressed tight. You promised you wouldn't cry, I whispered to myself, barely above breath. I remembered something my mother used to say, back when she still offered comfort instead of silence. People who humiliate others are afraid you'll one day outshine them. Maybe that was true. Maybe Frances saw something in me she couldn't control, couldn't dress up or dismiss. I blotted my lips, reapplied a neutral shade of lipstick with shaky hands, and fixed my hair, tucking the flyaways behind my ears. A little armor. Not much, but enough to go back out there and sit among the people who laughed at me. Play the part, I told my reflection. You're still here. By the time I returned to the reception hall, they had dimmed the lights and started pouring champagne. I slipped quietly back to my seat, sandwiched between a cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years and an old coworker of my brother's who barely remembered me. I forced a smile. My plate was untouched. My stomach had folded into itself. I told myself I came for my brother. That despite everything, despite her, he mattered. And maybe, if I kept quiet and clapped at the right moments, this night would pass without another scene. Frances stood at the front now, mic in hand, dress sparkling like a disco ball, eyes scanning the room like she owned it. The crowd cheered, not for her words, she hadn't spoken yet. Just for the performance they expected. She started her speech with the usual fluff, how happy she was, how she loved my brother, how they met during a yoga retreat that changed everything. I watched her closely, the way she glanced at my mother-in-law, who raised a wine glass in silent approval. The way her eyes flicked toward my table before she even got to the punchline. She wasn't talking to the room. She was talking to me. And let's not forget, she said, her voice turning sugary, my new sister. Always been the big one in the family. Big heart, big appetite, right? The laughter wasn't loud, but it was real. One of the waiters bit his lip and turned away. I gripped my napkin like it might stop my hands from shaking. She went on like nothing happened. To strong women, she said, raising her glass. And strong chairs. A few seconds passed. Enough for the air to shift. Then the laughter swelled, mostly from the family section. I looked at my brother. He smiled weakly and gave a half shrug like, what can I do? My father let out a booming laugh, the kind that fills silence but also breaks something sacred. My aunt leaned over, whispering, she's just joking, honey. Don't take it so seriously. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't just her. It was all of them. They'd watched her say things like this before. They'd let it slide. They'd chuckled when she teased, rolled their eyes when I didn't laugh along. I remembered birthdays where I sat alone at the end of the table. Holidays where I cooked the turkey but never got credit. Years of letting things go, telling myself they didn't mean it. Now I saw it for what it was. I laughed, just enough to pass. Just enough to not make a scene. Then I stood and excused myself, mumbling something about fresh air. The cool breeze outside hit me like truth. I clutched my handbag, not because I feared someone would grab it again, but because it reminded me I wasn't invisible. None of it surprised me. Not really. It just confirmed what I'd known for years but never said out loud. When people show you who they are, I whispered, believe them the first time. I wasn't angry at Frances anymore. I was angry at myself for expecting anything different. I stepped away from the patio where the reception buzzed under those string lights, still glowing like stars that refused to burn out. The air had turned cooler, sharper, typical autumn. But I didn't feel the cold. I stood near the fountain, watching people dance inside, their laughter leaking through the glass like it belonged to a different life. Off to the side, a little girl in a pale pink dress tugged at her mother's sleeve. The way she looked up at her, eyes full of trust, it hit something in me. Too deep to explain, just sharp enough to bleed. When I was little, I thought being quiet made you easier to love. Less trouble, less weight for people to carry. But silence doesn't buy you kindness. It just makes you invisible. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from Camille. Saw what happened. You okay? I locked the screen. I wasn't ready to package that moment into something polite enough to text. My hands slipped into my coat pockets, and my thoughts slipped further back, to that 9th birthday party. No balloons, no cake on the table. Just a soggy slice of leftover chocolate sheet cake in the fridge. My aunt, bless her, had remembered. She'd handed me a gift wrapped in newspaper and whispered, "Don't take it to heart, sugar." They just got busy. But they hadn't. They were in the living room, crowding around my cousin in her cheer uniform. New trophy, new reasons to celebrate someone else. I sat by the window that night with a slice of cake on a paper towel, listening to their laughter in the next room. That was the first time I thought, maybe if I'm smaller, they'll notice me more. That's how I learned to disappear. And Frances seemed to sense that trick and perfected it into a weapon. Tonight wasn't the first time she erased me. Just the most public. I made my way back into the reception, slowly, like I was bracing for another hit. I lingered near the edge of the dance floor, trying not to draw attention. But Frances found me before I could fade. She swayed over with a glass of champagne, her smile too wide, too rehearsed. "Well, look who decided to come back," she said, loud enough for the table beside us to hear. "Too bad your ex couldn't make it. Or was that before your last little breakdown?" Laughter from a few nearby guests. One woman covered her mouth like she wanted to stop herself, but didn't. I felt the breath leave me. Not in panic. In recognition. She didn't just dislike me. She enjoyed this. The tearing down. The small, cruel slices she could serve in front of a crowd and call it humor. I didn't respond. I stared at her glass. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, but my mouth didn't move. Silence used to feel safe. Like armor. Now it just felt like a straitjacket. Later, I found my brother near the bar. He looked surprised to see me. "Can we talk?" I asked. He nodded, but didn't move. "Why haven't you said anything?" He glanced toward the dance floor. "You know how Frances gets." I didn't want to make a scene. That was it. Not even an apology. Just that. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw a man who didn't protect me, not because he didn't see what was happening, but because it was easier for him not to care. "You know," I said quietly, "you don't have to light the match to be part of the fire. Just stand there and watch it burn." He didn't answer. I turned and walked away. Not because I wanted to cool off. Because if I stayed, I'd say something that would rip the whole night apart, and I wasn't sure anymore if that was a bad thing. Back at the table, I sat down slowly, crossing my legs, adjusting my coat. I wasn't trembling anymore. That was the last time I waited for someone else to protect me. Frances was out on the dance floor, arms in the air, laughing like she owned every inch of that venue. And for the first time, I didn't envy her. I didn't wish to be part of it. I just wanted out. "I'm done shrinking," I whispered. And that's when I knew, next time, I wouldn't walk away. I didn't even turn when I heard the voice. "That's a $20,000 Hermes Birkin." Just like that, everything shifted. The laughter hit a wall. The noise in the room sucked itself in. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. I could feel the air change, the kind of tension that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I stood still, the weight of every eye slowly turning my way. Frances' face drained of color. Her smirk, gone. Her hand dropped from her wine glass, like someone had just told her she sat on a bomb. It was Marcellus Brent, of all people, standing there with his suit perfectly creased and his voice calm like he was reading out the weather. I didn't know him well. Only seen him twice before. But in that moment, he might as well have been Moses parting the sea of fake smiles and high-pitched giggles. I watched as the guests leaned in, phones came out, quiet and not so quiet murmurs rippled through the room. My brother Curtis wouldn't look at me. Jerry, our father, cleared his throat loud enough to make the chandeliers hum. That was his move. Whenever someone said what he didn't want to hear, he coughed like it was a dust problem, not a people problem. And me? I didn't flinch. For once, I didn't shrink. In our family, value was a game of perception. Who brings the casserole to Thanksgiving? Who foots the bill when the car breaks down? Who pretends to be generous while collecting credit like coupons? I used to think being humble would earn me peace. It didn't. Marcellus glanced around, calm as ever. "Her bag? That's a genuine Birkin. Retail $20,000. That particular leather? Almost impossible to find now. Its value's only going up." Frances tried to laugh it off, one of those airy, nervous chuckles. "Oh, I didn't know. I just thought it was nice." I didn't even respond. I let her sit in it. She shifted on her heels. One of the guests at our table was already Googling. Another whispered, "That's more than my car." And it wasn't about the bag. Not really. It was about finally, having something undeniable in front of them. They couldn't joke it away, couldn't pretend they didn't know, couldn't bury it under fake concern and southern charm. For years, I gave more than I received. Time, energy, money, silence. Tonight, they finally put a price on it. And it cost them their comfort. The music cut off for a few seconds. Maybe the DJ needed a second to catch his breath too. The silence was loud. Curtis leaned in. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." I blinked. "Had to?" He looked at the floor, his voice barely a whisper. "You know how she gets." Jerry stood and raised his glass. "To family, and what we bring to it." No one raised theirs back. Everyone just looked at me. But no one said my name. That kind of recognition? It doesn't warm you. It chills you, like standing in the spotlight while they all hope you don't speak. Frances reached out under the table like she was going to touch the bag again. I didn't let her. I pulled it closer, slowly, keeping my hand firm on the handle. I didn't have to say anything. That move said more than a monologue ever could. Respect is not handed out at baby showers and Christmas dinners. It's earned in the dark, when no one claps. Paid for in years of swallowing your pride and showing up anyway. Not anymore. Later that evening, I stepped out to the terrace. The string lights above looked like tired stars. The air had cooled, finally, something honest. I stood there, breathing in deep. Letting it settle. I ran it all back. The insult, the way they laughed, the silence that followed. And the way the truth slipped into the room in a stranger's voice. Then I remembered something I read years ago. Maya Angelou said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." And they had, over and over. But tonight, I finally believed them. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, one I'd mistaken for misunderstanding, for awkwardness, for, "That's just how families are." No, this is how they are. I started thinking, quietly, clearly. Proof, strategy, the right allies. Not revenge. Control. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw drinks or cause a scene. That's what they expected. I'd do the thing they never could, plan. I looked down at the bag in my lap, my hand rested on the zipper. It wasn't just stuff. It was my line in the sand. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the one flinching when someone raised a glass. The morning after the wedding looked quiet enough to fool anyone. The sky was soft gray, the kind that promised calm but carried leftover thunder. I drove to Curtis and Frances's house like it was any other family brunch, even though my stomach told me I shouldn't go. Still, I showed up, sharp blazer, pressed jeans, a calm I had built overnight from pure discipline. The smell of bacon and biscuits drifted from the kitchen, rich and heavy, but the house felt cold. Frances opened the door with a smile so sweet it could rot your teeth. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, tone syrupy but with that same undertone she always used when she wanted control. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. My voice even, steady. Curtis hovered behind her, pretending to be busy with the coffee machine. He didn't look up once. Their mother was already seated at the table, talking about the weather, how the forecast said rain later, as if the night before hadn't happened. It was the morning after the storm, I thought, but the air still held thunder. I sat down. My fork clinked against the plate, and the sound seemed louder than it should have been. Frances started in almost right away. "You know, Aveline," she said lightly, "some people just can't handle jokes. It's a shame, humor's healthy." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just watched. There's a certain power in silence. It makes people reveal who they are when they think you're not dangerous. Her mother smiled politely, sipping coffee. Curtis poked at his food, eyes on the table. No one stopped her. No one ever did. I thought about every time I'd been told to, "Let it go," or "Don't make things awkward." Every time my silence kept their peace. Every time I thought forgiveness was strength. Silence from someone who claims to love you cuts cleaner than cruelty. I folded my napkin slowly. Something inside me stopped bending. When I stood up, the scrape of my chair hit like thunder in that quiet kitchen. "Let's make something clear," I said. Curtis's head snapped up. Frances froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Last night wasn't just mean," I continued, voice low but steady. It was malicious. And it ends here. Francis gave a short, mocking laugh. Oh, come on, Aveline. You're still upset? It was a joke, everyone laughed. Not everyone, I said. I looked her dead in the eye. If you ever touch what's mine again, physically or otherwise, you'll regret it in ways that don't involve handbags. Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Their father muttered my name like a warning. Aveline. I turned slightly toward him. No, I'm not here to belong anymore, I said quietly. I'm here to draw the line. The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. When I finally turned to leave, no one moved. Outside, the air felt cleaner, cooler, sharper. Curtis followed me to the driveway, his voice low. You didn't have to do that. I faced him. Did you want me to just take it again? He sighed. You know Francis. She doesn't always mean it. I stopped walking. And you never mean it either. But you always let it happen. He looked at me, his mouth working like he had something to say but couldn't form the words. I didn't let him off the hook. Loyalty without spine isn't love, Curtis. It's abandonment dressed in politeness. That one landed. He looked wounded, not because it wasn't true, but because it finally hit him how true it was. I'm sorry, he said after a pause. I nodded once. I know, but sorry doesn't fix the rot that silence built. I walked to my car, each step lighter than the last. My hands were steady as I slid the key into the ignition. It took me 35 years to understand, your worth isn't measured by how well you're tolerated. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed. For the first time in a long time, the air went all the way in. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and open. A line I'd once read echoed in my head. Don't light yourself on fire to keep others warm. I smiled, not bitterly this time, but with quiet certainty. I already knew what came next. Document. Protect. Prepare. They wanted my silence again. Fine. They could have it. But this time, my silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Let them wonder what I'll do next. Evening settled in heavy and still, like the sky had been holding its breath all day. The house felt too polished, cushions perfectly fluffed, fireplace flickering low even though no one needed the warmth. I sat on the far end of the Bell family's formal living room, angled just enough to see every face. The piano in the background played softly, but it didn't soften the tension. It only made it louder in the spaces between notes. Frances was holding court again, glass in hand, laughing at her own quips like she was on stage. Must be nice, she said, voice light but sharp, to have a bank balance big enough to match a mouth that bowled. A few guests chuckled. Not many. Not like before. I noticed it right away, shoulders tightening, people shifting in their seats, eyes darting to one another. Aunt Lorraine leaned forward, brow furrowed. Frances, she said under her breath but loud enough for half the room to catch it, enough jokes. This isn't funny. That was the crack. Two cousins on the sofa exchanged a look. One of them lifted her phone, recording quietly. Just in case. And Frances, still wearing her pearls and confidence, kept pushing. She made another remark, this time about my bag. Hope it didn't get scratched with all that dramatic energy around it. Silence. A muffled laugh. Then nothing. Her face faltered. It was faint, but I saw it, the shift. That flicker of recognition that the crowd was no longer clapping. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't need them. Not yet. Power isn't about having the floor. It's about what people think you'll say next. Then Marcellus stood up. He cleared his throat. The room turned toward him like water pulled by gravity. I have something I'd like to read, he said, pulling a folder from the inside of his coat. I sat straighter. He passed out copies, his voice clear and slow. This is the original will, signed and notarized, dated 10 years ago. Mamie and Jerry Hale named Venora, my mother, as the primary beneficiary. Curtis took a copy with both hands like it might burn him. Frances didn't touch hers. She grabbed her wine glass instead. Her hand shook. Nobody spoke. Marcellus kept reading, details, allocations, clauses that had been changed since. And then, the final page, a handwritten clause, added in Mammy's own hand, witnessed and initialed. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it was. The legal trigger. The reason the amended version wouldn't stand uncontested. Francis went still, stone still. Jerry rose slowly, his voice hoarse. We need to honor what was left unsaid for too long. He looked directly at me for the first time that night. I gave a small nod. Truth has a sound, and it's quieter than you'd think. By the time I made it back to the driveway, the sky had darkened completely. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, letting the tension settle into clarity. I pulled out my phone. Notes app. Bullet points. Next steps. Bank records. Legal contacts. Backup copies of what Marcellus revealed. For years, they told me silence was grace. Maturity. Self-control. Don't stir the pot. Just be the bigger person. But silence was never neutral. It was currency. And now I was done giving it away for free. They gave me invisibility, I whispered, I'll give them accountability. The wind moved through the trees as I turned the engine. The house behind me stayed lit, but smaller, shrinking in the mirror. My bag sat beside me on the passenger seat, zipped, untouched. Not a prize, not proof, just a reminder of everything they thought I wouldn't fight for. But they were wrong. Dinner was supposed to be formal. It had the trappings, linen napkins, heavy silverware, porcelain plates you only saw on holidays. But the energy in that room was cracked wide open. I stepped in and knew it. People were already seated, murmured greetings, half smiles. The chandelier overhead threw light down like a spotlight on the performance we were all expected to play. Frances looked my way, holding her wine glass like a shield. Her lips curled just slightly. That same smug, sidelong glance she always gave me when she thought she had the upper hand. She still believed she could outmaneuver me with a smirk and a well-placed jab. Jerry stood at the head of the table. His fingers tapped twice on the glass. Before we eat, he said, clearing his throat, a toast. To unity. The word sat wrong in my ears. Unity. He lifted his glass, looked first at Francis, then at me. And I knew exactly what that meant. Unity. If I stayed in my place. Unity. As long as I didn't disturb the order they all benefited from. My silence had been the price for my seat at this table. I didn't raise my glass. Jerry's voice caught. His fingers gripped the stem of his wineglass too tight, knuckles pale. Then he said it. Venora, my daughter. It slipped out like he hadn't meant to say it, like the words jumped past his teeth before he could catch them. The room gasped as one. Francis froze. Curtis's jaw dropped. Forks stopped midair. And I just blinked. 35 years. 35. I'd sat through birthday dinners, funerals, charity galas, and not once, had that word been given to me. But there it was, in front of God and cutlery. I swallowed, didn't let a single tear fall. Inside, something cracked open, but not in pain. In release. Finally you said it. Frances recovered fast. That's her talent, bouncing back before the blow even lands. But it didn't matter anymore. Because what came next unraveled her faster than she could fake a smile. Uncle James cleared his throat at the far end of the table. We've come to a decision, he said. Francis, the matter of the missing funds and the misappropriated shares. It's time you rectified the debt to the family company. Francis blinked, stunned. Her hands gripped the tablecloth. What are you saying? We're saying, Aunt Lorraine cut in, voice sharp, that the jokes are over. You owe the company. And the family. And we're not carrying it for you anymore. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just watched the heat rise up Frances's neck, saw the way her bottom lip twitched when her foundation of control started to crumble. This is absurd, she snapped. You're all just falling for her little act. Act? James asked flatly. Someone at the table muttered, it's about time. That was the final twist of the knife. Not a scream, not a fight. Just the firm, quiet sound of the table turning. Frances locked eyes with me. Her face was tight, but her voice cracked when she said, this is war. I looked at her, calm, cool, certain. You started it. Dinner resumed, but no one tasted much. After dessert was cleared, I stepped outside to the terrace. String lights draped overhead, soft and golden against the deep navy of night. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but to steady the storm inside me. I came here to get through the night. But somewhere between the toast and the tears that never came, I realized something. I didn't just want to survive this story. I wanted to own it. I reached into my bag. Not for a phone, not for a plan, but for the small scarf I always carried, the one Mamie gave me years ago. Blue and silver, worn. It smelled faintly of lilac. I held it in my palm, pressed it to my lips. Then I whispered, to no one, to everyone, I'm not waiting to be claimed. I claim myself. The door behind me creaked. Voices still carried from inside. But I was no longer trying to be part of their world. I turned and walked back in, head high. I stood behind the velvet rope lining the ballroom floor. The last dance was fading into soft strings, couples swaying like they had nothing to hide. From where I stood, I could see everything, chandeliers gleaming above, high heels clicking low, and Frances moving through the crowd like she still owned it. I adjusted the blue-silver scarf around my neck. I hadn't worn it as decoration. It was armor, a marker, a quiet flag to myself that I wasn't here to blend in anymore. I'd thought through every step since the brunch. Not revenge, clarity, not noise, strategy. I didn't need them to like me. I needed them to remember I was watching. Frances was across the room, laughing too loudly. Too much wine, too much attention. But even the ones who used to gather around her now seemed a little more careful. She didn't see it yet. But I did. The stage had been hers for years. That night, I was ready to walk onto it. She made her way to the mic. Tapped it twice. That fake southern charm dripped off every word. Thank y'all for being here tonight. Family means the world to me. She was halfway through her speech when her heels snapped. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Her body jolted slightly, catching herself on the podium. She laughed it off, brushing her dress, trying to keep the illusion intact. Then she bent down, straightened up again, grabbed her purse. Or so she thought. She left it on the side table behind her. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, past the crowd, picked up the bag with 2 fingers and held it steady. Ran my hand slowly over the leather like I was confirming its weight. Frances turned, saw me, and her face flushed. I didn't raise my voice. Just said, if it's not yours to carry, you leave it behind. Gasps weren't loud, but they echoed anyway. Her laugh faltered. She tried to save face, but her body betrayed her, shoulders too tight, eyes twitching. She turned and stormed out of the ballroom. Just like that. No curtain call, no applause, just absence. I held the bag for a moment longer, then passed it to the nearest cousin. Didn't need it, didn't want it. Sometimes winning isn't about proving you were right. Sometimes it's just about standing there when someone else finally trips over their lies. I walked back to my seat, sat down slow. Moments later, a tap on my shoulder. Someone I barely knew held out their phone. You should see this, she whispered. It was already up. A video. Frances tripping. My voice, soft and clear, cutting through the ballroom. If it's not yours to carry. The caption read, when the queen leaves her crown behind. I watched the clip play out on loop, edited, slowed down, stylized. It didn't need to go viral to matter. But it was. The shares climbed. The comments rolled in. 'Bout time someone stood up. She been due for that fall. Where do I buy that scarf? I didn't grin, but I did feel seen. I wasn't chasing applause. I'd lived too long in rooms that clapped for cruelty. What I needed now was proof. And that bag, that stumble, that moment, it was more than enough. The crowd thinned. Some people left pretending not to have seen what they did. Others whispered, processing the shift. I slipped out to the driveway, the air brisk against my cheeks. The bag was still with me, but it felt lighter now. Symbolic more than physical. I took out my phone. Dialed Juno. We go live next week, I said. Start prepping the documents. All of them. She didn't ask why, just said, got it. I looked at the car parked under the archway, headlights dimmed, quiet like everything else around me. A quote I scribbled years ago floated back. You don't have to shout to be heard, just show up with truth. That was it. I looked down at the screen again. Over 200 shares, 50 comments. I didn't reply to any. Just watched. Let the internet chew on it while I got back to work. As I opened the car door, the scarf fluttered once in the wind, then settled across my shoulder. I drove away, not with victory in my rearview mirror. But with the road ahead finally, mine. It was 2 weeks after the wedding, but the air still felt like something had shifted. I sat alone at a corner table in a quiet cafe, the kind where the coffee came with a little lemon slice and no one asked you why you were writing in a notebook. Sunlight crept across the pages like it knew it belonged there. I didn't need to relive it all, but I wrote anyway. There's power in seeing your own thoughts laid out plain. I scribbled. Your power shows not when you're loud, but when your silence shifts the room. I hadn't said much to anyone since that night. I didn't need to. The clip faded from trending, but people remembered. I felt it in how some folks now paused before they spoke to me, more cautious, more respectful. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hungry for attention. I felt calm, like I'd stood through a storm and come out dry on the other side. A shadow moved across the table. I looked up. Alan. My brother-in-law. He'd never been cruel, but never brave either. Always a background figure to Francis. Smiling, silent. Mind if I sit? I nodded. He lowered himself into the chair like it was heavier than it should be. Then he pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. For your trust fund, he said. You were right. It should have gone to you all along. I didn't touch it yet. Just looked at him. He sighed. I stayed quiet because it felt easier. Francis, she was always louder. And I told myself that meant she knew better. His voice cracked on the last word. I saw the video, he added. But it wasn't the fall. It was how you stood there, calm. That's when I knew I'd been following the wrong one. I believed him, not because of the envelope, but because of how his hands shook when he said it. I forgive you, I said, softly. But I already had. I had to, or I wouldn't be sitting here. He looked down, then nodded once and left the envelope right there on the wood before walking out. I stared at it for a long time. Back home that afternoon, I opened the old cedar chest in the hallway. Photos, handwritten cards, flyers from events I once begged to be part of. I held each one for a moment, not with sadness, but with understanding. All of that had brought me here. I placed a few items into a donation box. Among them, the blue-silver scarf. I folded it carefully, slid a note inside. For when she's ready to walk out bold. Then I updated my will. Signed over the trust documents. Tucked them into a folder for my niece. She didn't know the full story yet, but she would. I wrote her a letter. Here's your story. Take the better parts and build something kinder. I stood on the porch, the box by my side. Crisp leaves fell in slow spirals across the lawn. Then my phone buzzed. Francis. Text. Dinner? Just us. Let's talk. I stared at it. Then replied, no need. We already said everything, just not out loud. I set the phone down, poured a glass of wine, and watched the sky shift colors like it was letting something go too. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself to anyone. Didn't need to soften anything. Didn't need to win. I began typing my own story, not a reaction, but a declaration. In my mind I heard it again. They once called me a fat pig. Now they call me untouchable, because I didn't flinch. That was the last thing they'd ever call me. And it wouldn't matter anyway. Because I wasn't listening anymore. I was already moving forward.